Hello and welcome to Thinkermaker, a Savvy Self production. In this episode we unwrap essential elements of the 2019 document which Boris's British government and the European Union have agreed to sign, and we'll briefly explore an alternative approach. First, let's make two things clear. The media keeps describing the document as a deal, Boris's deal. That's not accurate. It's a treaty, Boris's treaty. Very different to a deal, and we'll come to that. Secondly, the document is actually two documents, Part 1 and Part 2. Part 1 is massive, with 585 pages divided into chapters and articles. Part 2 is smaller and divided into numbered paragraphs. Part 1 is said to be legal. It's called the Withdrawal Agreement. The media misleads us all by describing this Part 1 as the divorce papers. Part 2 is said to be not legal. It's called a political declaration. And they say it supposedly contains harmless intentions for a future relationship. But we're going to show that these documents are just sinister smoke and mirrors, which will shatter in our face. Let's see how these two documents are designed to befuddle people. In this mock-up, Article 1 in Part 1 sounds good. It happily declares in big and bold that the UK is free to trade with the world. But there is a condition. UK trade must be in accordance with paragraphs in Part 2. So now we have to look up the second document. How tedious. Most of us won't bother, but we have bothered for you. It says, sure, we can trade freely with the world, Australia, Dubai, anywhere, but only if the quality standards for goods in those countries match EU standards. Now, of course, other countries have their own standards, so we can't trade with them freely. You see, the devil is in the detail. And we all know who doesn't do detail. Yeah, Boris. Just for comparison, the US Constitution was written on just 4 pages. Keep it simple. In democracy, every voter should understand the document. A deal is a contract, usually involving money in exchange of something, and it ends when the transaction is done. A treaty is a massively significant international agreement that covers much more, such as military, social and political policy issues. It can last hundreds of years. It's super important to have a crystal clear, unambiguous end date. You don't want a treaty to last forever. Here's an example. In 1841, China signed a treaty that gave Hong Kong over to the British. But then it probably back then looked like this. And China only got it back when the treaty ended in 1997, 156 years later. And look at it now. You see what can happen in 1.5 centuries. So, back to Boris's EU treaty, you can think of those documents like a pack of cards that have been equally dealt to 2 players. But hang on. What if there were jokers in the pack? Were the cards fairly distributed? And who got the jokers? The answer is the EU got the jokers, and they can keep using them to trump us for years to come. Now let's see where the jokers have been slipped into those treaty documents. The first joker is buried in this long sentence in Article 184 of the first document. Don't let your eyes glaze over. Don't worry. We've put the tricky bits in red highlights. The UK is expected to use best endeavours to legally sort the future relationship. Got that? Now look here. It tells us to reference the other document for how the future relationship looks. That's a trick. When this legal document makes a reference to the second document, it effectively makes the second one legal as well, even though the media keeps telling us that Part 2 is not legal. See? Smoke and mirrors. Now look at the last line, which says, all this applies after the transition period. Can you see what's missing? Yeah, there's no end date, which means there's no limit to the number of times the EU can extend UK membership. Even if we don't want an extension, there's nothing to stop the EU extending the date. This could go on forever and keep us in the EU, because the UK could keep offering the EU new terms for a trade deal, and the EU could simply keep rejecting our offers. As long as there's no new trade agreement, the EU can unilaterally extend our membership to keep us in. And each year, we have to pay our membership dues. In fact, the EU negotiator, Michael Barnier, has already said he expects at least 3 more years of negotiations. So that's joker number 1. There's no wording or date that stops the EU from repeatedly extending to keep us in the EU. And that would be without any voting or veto rights. And charging the UK for the privilege. Now for the EU, that's fab. The British voice would be silenced, but the money still rolls in. It's like your gym membership being renewed every year, whether you want it or not. Ka-ching! And you get charged for it regardless. Would you agree to get trapped like that? No. Okay, so what's the second joker? You'll find it in Article 127 of the first document. Check out the red highlight. European law applies to the UK, and that means the European Court of Justice rules until the UK is out of the EU. But hang on, we've just seen that the EU's first joker card can keep extending our membership of the EU, so the transition period could be never-ending, and EU laws never-ending as well. And during this time, they can change laws to suit the EU. Okay, now stick with us, just a bit more legal stuff. Look at Article 4. This says UK judges will have to regard EU laws even after the transition period. Article 168 says if there's any dispute, the only recourse is arbitration procedures in the treaty. And where are those procedures? In Article 174, which tells us the EU courts have the final say on the meaning of disputed terms in their laws. All this taken together means we can't go to independent international courts. And look how all these paragraphs and their numbers jump around. Smoke and mirrors. That's the second joker. In short, the first joker lets them keep extending to keep us in the EU and paying a fee for this unwanted privilege. The second joker means we remain under EU laws indefinitely. Now the second document in Boris's treaty repeats these points about the future in paragraphs 118, 120 and 131. What a joker. Now our Parliament therefore will not be sovereign, instead a puppet under the control of the EU. Boris's treaty contains so many devils in the detail. Let's quickly unearth just a few more. What about unleashing the UK to freely trade with the world? The treaty seems to say we can, but let's check the small print. Again, the devil is in the detail, and they've buried it in the second document. Paragraph 17 states that the UK will have to ensure a level playing field. And paragraph 21 requires deep regulatory and customs cooperation. This wording contradicts the ability to trade freely with the world because other countries may have different quality regulations and standards. So the UK will not be free to make her own mind up about each country around the world. Now, don't imagine the UK wants to slack on standards, since before EU membership the UK had high standards. Take our 3-pin plug standard with an earth wire for electrical safety. Many countries match the UK, unlike Europe with only 2 pins. Different ways of doing things, different standards. We just want freedom to set high standards that suit us and the world. The EU treaty won't let us do this. It creates a heavy ball and chain around British free trade globally. While we're on the topic of global opportunities, you'd do well to know some of the opportunities that are waiting for us. Have you heard of CANZUK? A vision since 2015 for a trading bloc made of Canada, Australia, New Zealand and the UK. What an opportunity, twice the landmass of the USA. And of course, there is also the whole Commonwealth, which includes fast-growing India. Check out this CANZUK video with this link. It'll put a bounce in your step today. So it's not just about trading with the USA, although that is also a great opportunity. Okay, next, foreign policy and defence. The treaty is a minefield of buzzwords. Take this one, impede. Article 129 of the treaty makes clear that the UK must never impede EU foreign action. Well, hang on. That means the UK is not free to make her own foreign policy. The next bit says the UK cannot provide commanders. So British forces are commanded by the EU. And the next bit says, despite this, we have to pay into the military budget. And the second document says the UK will collaborate with the EU Defence Agency, permanent structured cooperation. Note that word, permanent. And finally, the referee over all of this will be EU law. Now, if you're sharp, you'll have noted this all lasts till the end of 2020. But don't forget that joker card. They can keep extending. So, we give away command of our military to a faceless bureaucracy, and inch by inch it risks creeping toward becoming part of an EU army. Okay, here's another buzzword in the section on fishing. Non-discriminatory. We're told that the UK gets autonomy over her fishing waters. Yay! Oh, but wait. This is on condition that there is non-discrimination against EU boats fishing in UK waters. Can you see the catch? And if there is any dispute, the UK might not be able to protect British fishing because with Boris's treaty, the UK must not impede EU foreign policy. Remember that? Finally, money. Everyone knows they want 39 billion before talking to the UK about a future trade deal. But besides that, Boris's treaty really does give the EU a blank check, and payments to the EU continue well after the transition period. Here, look, Article 138 says they continue to apply after the end of 2020, and it foresees payments after the end of 2028. That's 9 years away. Article 132 states quite clearly that payments into the EU budget can continue beyond 2020 to the end of new extensions to the transition period. And remember, they have a joker card to keep extending. But the really scary one is this, Article 157 at the bottom. It says that even after supposedly leaving the EU, after end of 2020, the UK remains liable for the EU going bust. Hello? I smell a rat. Let's check out just one of those liabilities. The EU has a bank called the European Investment Bank. You never heard of it? Yeah, well, you better ask John Major and Tony Blair and the BBC why they never told you about it. So this bank gives euro loans and credit for redevelopment projects all over Europe. And right now, it has 500 billion in liabilities. The UK owns 16% of that bank. The bank has never paid a dividend to its UK owner, but if it goes bust, the UK is on the hook for a mighty chunk of that 500 billion. Now, let's see what that much money looks like. This is to give you an idea. 1 million. A pallet of money, 100 million. Many pallets of money next to this fellow, 100 billion. And here is 500 billion next to that chap over there. It's enough to give £25,000 to every Brit aged 20 to 40 years old. So hopefully you agree, this Boris Treaty is smoke and mirrors, and there are many more pitfalls, minefields and traps within it, but hopefully what you've seen has made clear that the UK's best option is a simple trade deal without legal and political links to the EU. This trade deal can just as easily be agreed after leaving with a clean break. Thank you for watching.